So this session is titled Accessibility, Meeting the Existing and Emerging Passenger Needs, and I'm going to hand you over to much safer hands, much more professional hands, Mr. Christopher Wood, MBE no less, who will moderate us through this session.
Thank you, Becky. That's very kind of you. Nice introduction. There's two abilities that are top of the list in and around aviation at the moment. Accessibility is one and sustainability is the other. These seem to be the two top subjects when you go to a lot of presentations and a lot of talks. And I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. So I'm going to start in the middle. And Iris, could you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm Iris Kowen. I'm from Israel. I'm first and foremost a parent of a severely mentally and physically disabled son. I'm also I have extensive experience with airlines because I was a flight attendant, and my last position in the airline was customer relations specialist in accessibility issues. So now I'm a independent.
Looking for a job.
Yeah. No.
And on my left is Walt. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi there. I'm Walt Fluharty. I'm representing All Wheels Up, and after a long career at Boeing, I'm a board member for the Aviation committee that helps with All Wheels Up. Their job, their desire is to have wheelchair space on aircraft. That's the end goal, and of course we all know in this room that's a very difficult task, but we're striving for that goal. And their mission is for accessible, safe, and dignified access to aircraft. And the dignified part is very important because I think we all know that for wheelchair users or mobility limited people, it's quite an undignified process to get from your home to the airport, on the aircraft, off the aircraft, and back to your destination. So there you go.
And last but not least, my good friend Sebastian.
Thank you very much, Chris. So I'm Sebastian. I come from the Diehl Aviation. Diehl Aviation is a company doing interiors for aircraft. I there am a cabin. The title is long and non-important. I deal with mostly accessibility and new products which enable flight for the elderly and the people with special needs.
Thank you very much, Seb. So I was one of those people that at Gatwick on Sunday night that was told that Hamburg Airport is shut. So I got in my car, went under the tunnel and drove for 10 hours to here. So yesterday I had a very good night's sleep and I didn't have much time to prepare. So what I'm saying is we're going to wing it and we're just going to work as we go along. But we did have a little chat, and a question I kind of put to everybody here, because we talk about accessibility, we talk about wheelchairs, and we talk about the blind, the deaf, the hard of hearing and so forth. It's a wide spectrum. But should we be designing for our older selves, Walt? Now you're retired.
Oh, absolutely. I think, of course, we have to design for older people, because guess what? We're all getting older. I'm part of the baby boomer group that in the United States, and there's going to be many older people, much more older people, many older people over and above the younger population. We all have to strive for access to elderly people.
It's interesting because I have a brother who lives in Spain, and my mother went out to visit him a few weeks ago. She's 80. There is no way can she book her flight. I do it for her. Even the check-in process, which is very digital now, is challenging for her. And do we want to keep that person flying, Iris? Should we be designing for that person?
Of course we do. We're going to be there as well. On my flight, actually, there was a big group of older people. Older, not old, older. You have to be careful these days. And I was astonished. I looked at them and I said, I hope I can be like this in 20 years. Because there's no reason that older people can't travel. The fact that maybe they can't work out the logistics in reservation, doing all the reservation stuff, it's technologically. But otherwise, I think we have to make sure that airlines and airplanes are accessible for them.
Absolutely. Seb, here's the kicker. They've got a lot of money. And they're
They
loyal.
have a good market.
My mother won't fly with anybody else unless she has to. These are loyal people with lots of money, which I will inherit at some point, and will fight amongst my brothers. But at the moment, I'm encouraging her to travel. I said, go and see the world. She's got a cruise. And maybe that's what a lot of people want to do, because the logistics of flying is just so challenging. Is that something you feel we can do something about, Seb? Or do we wait for this generation to just, that's it, they're gone now, we can go tech?
Good question, Chris. So there's a part of it which we can do from a cabin perspective. There's another part which is very different. If you look into Japan, in Japan you can travel from your home to another place, and the luggage will be taken at your doorstep and it will be delivered at the doorstep where you arrive. So there's a whole service industry around that, which especially caters to the elderly. In the cabin, actually, we're very happy in Germany that we have a government-funded program for research into these topics. So yes, we're currently looking into making the cabin more accessible. I'll give you a few examples. While I can still lift my hand up, my father's range of motion stops about here. So when he wants to call the flight attendant, he has to ask the person next to him whether he can press the button. Or if you want to reach the oxygen masks which fall down, it's much easier for us than for somebody who's elderly. Not to speaking of flight anxiety, losing vision, impaired hearing. So we are currently looking into very affordable retrofit solutions. Because
They're out there.
you will agree that most of the solutions which are expensive are just not going to be taken. I mean, look at the crowd which was here before for in-flight entertainment, and at the scattered crowd, thank you very much for being here, we have now for accessibility.
Absolutely. But accessibility has been growing all the time. But Seb, I would say to you, it's not the size of the room, it's the people in the room, isn't it? And I've always said that, and it's always been true. The other thing I was going to suggest is, and just picking up your point, I mentioned this yesterday, we'll move on from our more mature population in a minute, but I'm an avid reader, and I'm reading a book on loneliness, which is kind of, I'm lonely so I'm reading a book. In Japan now, some of the elderly people go shoplifting so they can go to prison, to have a community, to talk to people, to have a nice bed and to be fed. That's shocking, isn't it? But I need to speak to Daniel about that as well. That's true, because I know he lives in Tokyo. The other thing that came up yesterday when we were talking, obviously most of you know we have, I'm part of a consortium with Priestman Good and SWS certification, and we built a wheelchair space in an aircraft which has been manufactured. We're now collaborating with Diehl Flight Products. So I've had a few questions about this from people who know far better than I. And obviously it's in the DNA to monetize anything that sits on an airline. But should we monetize inclusion? Because if you're not including, by default, you're excluding, which is really not a thing we should be in, certainly in the Western world. So Walt, we touched on this just before. Should we monetize the fact that we want to help people fly? Should that be monetized? And I know the answer is yes.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to pass it on to Sebastian. Had a great answer, and I loved his answer that we talked about earlier. So I'll pass it on.
Go on, Seb.
Okay, so there's two answers for that. From a commercial perspective, yes, definitely. These are people who have the money, who can travel. From a humane perspective, this is the last thing that you want to do, Chris. These are people, human beings, who deserve just as much to have equal travel and equal chances in life as we all do. It's not their fault that they're in a wheelchair. Looking at what we have today in flight, I would say that unless we have some sort of commercial incentive for the airlines, they are not very likely to pick up on the inclusion. That is why, now from my perspective as a cabin supplier, I need to walk that fine line of finding another benefit, like more seats into the airplane or lighter solutions, and just package the accessibility with it.
Yeah. So, but I will actually add, since it was my question to me, I will add to the I will add to the discussion in that as I understand it, as we age or in our lifetime, there will be up to 15% of the people needing that type of an access. They will become disabled in one way or another. 15% of the people in this world will become disabled in one way or the other. So it's possible that the market is there and that you might be able to monetize this. The market is there and it's going to continue to be there and continue to grow. So the answer might be possibly. Maybe we shouldn't, maybe ethically we should not, but it might be possible to do so.
So do we go to those men in dark bunkers, in dark rooms who do the data and say, I'd like some data, please?
Or perhaps we monetize some of it and give away a lot of it. Who knows?
So the other thing I was thinking about was, monetizing it is one thing and so on and so forth. But could governments are getting more and more involved, regulators are getting more involved. And if the airline industry says, yes, we'd love to do this, but my God, it's going to cost a bit of tax relief. Could that be possible from a government who wants something done? And they say, well, we'll give you some tax relief, some sort of, I want to say a grant, but after the pandemic, you can't really say that. But some sort of help and assistance, because effectively anything with an accessibility, I think the airlines would say, yeah, we're trying to help our passenger. Kind of, I'm buying that. I've got nothing else. What do you think about that, Iris? Do you think government should help support an airline for something which should have been done years ago?
I think it's not a bad idea. I think airlines do understand the importance of this market share. And I just want to make a comment that we're not only talking a disability in a wheelchair. We are talking, there is such a wide variety of disabilities now. In the airline, when I met a lot of families that are flying with kids that are autistic on the spectrum. And sometimes it doesn't take much other than just attention from the air crew or from the ground crew to give them what they want, to make them feel comfortable. So I think on one hand, we need to listen to the market and meet with people with different disability groups or whatever. And on the other hand, we as consultants need to help the airlines meet those needs in a way that they don't have to dig too much into their pockets. Even if the government doesn't help them, and that's a country-specific thing, and not every government will give whatever tax break, but I think airlines, it should be in the airlines' interest to address these issues in order to grow their market. It is a monetary thing. It is a market share.
I did say yesterday that, I saw an Expedia advert. Some of you guys might have seen it. There's a young lady in a wheelchair kind of speeding along a path in front of a hotel and a coastal vista. And what airline can use someone in a wheelchair to promote their product? I'm going to throw this out there because I don't know. Anybody know of one? And there's a 13+ trillion market, and I'm sure that figure is wrong. And everybody go, that's a lot. Well, let's halve it then. Let's call it 7. It's still $7 trillion. But those guys at Expedia, at McDonald's, at Amazon, at Guinness, they're using inclusion in their advertising because two things. They want to tap into that market, and secondly, it's just the smart and the right thing to do. And guess what? We all love seeing it. We all love watching the Paralympics. We all love, how does that guy get within 2 seconds of Usain Bolt with a bloody prosthetic leg on? If he can do it, well, I can do it. Well, I can't really do it, but you get the idea. But there's some marketing being missed, Seb. Would that be correct?
There is a very strong marketing possibility there, yes. And never forget that you can also market the fact that you're doing the good thing, the right thing, which is very important. I guess airlines or many people today don't see the immediate benefit, and especially after Corona drained the cash of many of the participants in the market, it's difficult to explain why you should invest in something that's just an image. And that will change, and that will change through governments, but I believe, to pick up your points, not through giving money or funding it, but through regulation. Because if you give regulation, then you have an even playing field. Today, a company which invests into the topic of accessibility will have a disadvantage competition-wise because they have less seats in their airplane or they take on more weight. If it's mandated, it's an even playing field, and suddenly everybody can invest into it. And then some airlines, like Delta Airlines, they actually advertise then the fact that you can come with us, we'll take care of your wheelchair, and you'll have a pleasant flight. And if more people start doing that, then it will not become something special, it will become a must-have.
With Delta, it's interesting watching social media over the last few years that I have, and every airline has its moments, some do better than others, but whenever an incident happens, and it's Delta, there's a lot of comments underneath, people saying, actually, they're pretty good for me. And it's great to see I'd rather see the positive stuff. But we're all human beings, sometimes things go wrong, and those people that handle it, we've all had bad days, so I just think you've got to cut some people a bit of slack, and not everybody knows the procedure. And I saw a young girl, she must be 21, going away with her friends to Ibiza. She didn't know she had to check in her wheelchair. She didn't know any first time away, and she's stuck on the tarmac and nobody's helping her in the plane. And it's not that she did anything wrong, but nobody told her. She never put her hand up and said a word to the wheelchair. But it's always interesting. I find the marketing thing interesting, and that opening up that avenue. I just think there's so much more to get there. Well, with All Wheels Up, and Michelle over there does a terrific job. I kind of want to say, how are you doing? Is All Wheels Up? Are they starting to? They were looking at training, and I think training is something which I'm sure you will know, Iris. It's the back end, but sometimes I think the training is to get around the lack of infrastructure. So, is training a thing we should look at more?
Well, and I'll back up a little bit. All Wheels Up, of course, is working towards, they work very closely with the government, with certain senators and representatives to bring laws into the United States that support accessibility and inclusion on aircraft. And part of that, one of the big movements this year will be requiring that there is certified training by all the people that handle or work with disabled people, getting them on the aircraft. Right now, there's no certification, there's no particular training required across the board for all airlines. And one of the goals in the upcoming 2023 FAA reauthorization bill will be to set up a system, set up a requirement, set up a certification for those people working with disabled people, and specifically with wheelchair-bound individuals, such that they are trained properly to get that person on from the skybridge to the aircraft, on the aircraft safely, and back off again when they get to their destination. So this is a strong and a big push right now on that many-stepped process to getting a wheelchair on the aircraft as well. So we're working very hard on that.
The trouble I find with training, and I often get approached about it, but it's not something I want to do because I would be rubbish at it, is there's too many silos in training. IATA have got one. Open Doors have got one. There's a couple in the UK have got training. I can think of Skywise and a few others. Are they all going off the same hymn sheet? I think not.
Yeah,
and
in fact...
And we need to harmonise that, but like everything in aviation, it's not bloody harmonised.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the regulatory agencies have to be involved, because they're the ones that set the minimum requirements.
Yeah.
And therefore, we would all have to work to those minimum requirements.
Yeah. In your time in El Al, what was the training like there? Did you have training, or was that your kind of remit to a degree, Iris?
Yeah. So, when I was trained as a flight attendant, there's the emergency training. Emergency training is harmonized. It's all over the world. It's IATA or whatever it is. We all do the same thing. And when I flew a different airline this time when I came here. They're all doing the same thing. So there's no reason why we couldn't train. And it shouldn't be more than a day and a half of training for the air crew or ground crew. I just want to say something regarding training, the transfer. I recently flew with my son for medical treatment in New York from Tel Aviv. It's a 12-hour flight, and my son cannot transfer by himself, so they needed to transfer him. There are transfer slings that are not in use for whatever reason. So the way they transfer passengers are they just grab them, in a very undignified way.
Especially if you're female.
Well, my son is not a female, but he almost fell to the ground, and he was dead scared. The whole flight experience was could have been ruined if he was on the ground. So I think in terms of training, it's the technical solutions which can be very simple, as you said. It doesn't have to be costly, and sometimes it's just to have attention for that person, whatever his needs are, whether he can go to the bathroom or not, whether he can open that bottle of water or not. It doesn't have to be a costly education session, but it does have to be, there are different areas of care that have to be implemented throughout the education of crews.
So I'm on the Heathrow Aircraft Airline Access Board and Airport Access Board, and they recently, I think it was Wilson James, said to transfer you have to use your own sling. You have to use their sling. Now my daughter travels in her own sling. It's suitable for her, and I watched her. We'd just come back from skiing. My daughter goes down on a sit ski far too fast in the mountains of Austria. I've told her to make a will because I think as she carries on this will. So she has her own chair. So we had, and she also went to Fiji for Christmas. This is, I tell my kids what they can do, not what they can't do. And 3 times she was transferred in her own sling at Heathrow, and the 4th time they said, no, you've got to use ours. And this, again, it was an awful process because they had to take her sling out and put another one in. Totally ridiculous. It's not at any other airports. What the bloody hell is Heathrow doing at that without a word? But you're telling me there wasn't even a sling available, Iris?
No, there
and
isn't.
Was that Tel Aviv
Yes.
or New York?
Yeah. No, Tel Aviv. New York was neither. We didn't have one in New York either.
Because I thought, well, they call it grab and go. I thought that had gone. And for those of you that don't know, is that when that goes wrong, someone is dropped on the cabin floor, and there's normally a lawsuit that follows. And what follows that tends to be, if it was me, I would get offered a lot of money and a gagging clause. That's why you don't hear about it. And I know I have a network. For those of you that have ever watched All the President's Men, I have a few deep throats out there that say, hey Chris, we've got another one dropped. So I kind of know what goes on. And if it's a young person, they're going to take the money. In fact, anybody, because it's a shed load of money to stay stumm. We should not be picking people up.
No, we shouldn't. You know, I was handling a claim by a passenger whose shoulder was misplaced because they lifted her up.
Oh, absolutely. You know,
and that's going back to the monetary, because we're going to save the airlines a lot of money in claims. I'm not talking about damages to wheelchairs, which is, again, another big problem which airlines don't want to talk about.
Well, there was a lady, and she was probably about my age, 60 or 70. They picked her up, and they put her down, and unfortunately, one leg was this side of the armrest, one leg was the other. It was awful. I want to move on to just something else which has just disappeared from my brain. Whenever I post something about accessibility and wheelchair access, everybody goes, I can't go to the toilet. And so the toilet, Seb, you're my toilet man to go to. You and me and Lavs, we talk a lot. We'd love to make them bigger, wouldn't we? And there is some work being done in America. As far as I'm aware, Walt, the jury is still out at the DOT. We're still waiting for the implementation, which is the PVA taking the DOT to court to say we want a bigger accessible toilet on a single aisle aircraft. It's very likely they will be mandated to do that, but it's the timeline, isn't it, that it's, and I've seen one airline say we need at least 18 years. I'm going, mate, 18 years to wait to go to the toilet. But more importantly, you've had 18 years to think about this. So you should put a couple of dollars in a piggy bank and know it's going to come. From Diehl Aviation's point of view, how restrictive is that footprint that you've got to work with, Seb?
That's a trick question for me. So I'll start. A standard lavatory has a 36-inch footprint. The newest lavatories, which you'll find on the 737 and the A320, have a 28-inch footprint. So they've gotten smaller by 8 inches. That means that if you've reached a certain size, you can only back in backwards, but you can't really move inside. We produce, since a long time, 64 inches, so it's about twice as big as a standard lavatory, which opens the door some 40 inches. So there you can really go into with your wheelchair, and the wheelchair is positioned next to the lavatory. I would say that's the ideal situation, but the airline will lose a row of seating. Now, we've talked about monetization earlier, so the obvious solution is what we can do is we can glue 2 smaller lavatories together that will work with lavatories which are 28-inch or even 26-inch wide, and then just have a wall in the middle which folds away. Incidentally, if you want to see that, it's on our stand, and you're all invited to come. So there are solutions which are ideal, really ideal. It's just a matter of what do you do with that space. So there's some work that we're doing where you can use that space for stowage of trolleys during taxi, takeoff and landing, so you're not really losing it, and you take the trolleys out during flight.
I was consulting on a toilet, and they said they wanted, which sounds even better, talking about they want to cover as many accessibility issues as possible. So they said, what about voice control? And the first one is language.
We have it, actually. It works. So
can you push a flag or something?
So let me start with a general question. Because I see a gentleman there with a guide dog. So we did do something as an investigation where we had braille placards. So it's actually possible to have certified braille placards everywhere. But that only solves it when you're there. What we also did is we made a DIN A4 sheet like you have your safety card, which was all braille, which explained the layout of the aircraft, the layout of the lavatory, where you would find what and how you action it, and actually what noises you will hear when you actuate the different parts of the lavatory. And yeah, it never went further than that.
I remember consulting and saying, look, and it came down to you can't please everyone all the time. So with the voice control, as someone points out to me, someone with autism might actually go, oh my God, this is not a good sensory place for me. And so in other words, what might solve one disability issue creates another one on the other side. So it's very difficult to cover all bases. And when I was helping design this, it was just like, and you know, Seb's has got a great lab, and given the footprint, he's done a fantastic job on it. And yeah, it is worth going down to see. But lavatories are a big issue, I think. And I watched one lady, probably about my age, reverse into a toilet, like you just said. And I asked her, that was on a 380, so yeah, they're quite good on there. And I said, why did you reverse in? She had a hip operation a few years ago, and she did not want to play Twister inside that toilet. So she was very careful as to how she got in. I tell you what, we're coming up to 11:30. Should we throw it out to the floor? Get a few questions. Anybody out there got a few questions? And I can see Thierry there. What can I do for you, Thierry? What? Yes.
Thierry Dubois with Aviation Week. You referred to undignified transfer process using a sling. I'm not familiar with it, so what's a sling and how is it supposed to be used?
I've got no mic.
Do you want to go ahead?
Well,
I can certainly start.
It's the way I think you could, if you can imagine how they transfer patients in a hospital, they just put them like on a sheet or something, and they just pull them together. I think physically it makes it easier for the people who are transferring, and you're not grabbing anybody.
Yeah, so personally. It's like a sheet
It's
with
like
handles at the side.
With handles.
I mean, it's quite brutal to watch, and you are supposed to use the word load or invite all disabled passengers to load first. Well, that doesn't happen. Right. You can be done in front of all passengers, because as we know, we talked about monetizing turnaround times for certainly the single aisle aircraft, the budget airlines, turnaround times are everything. So yeah, there's some. rule breaking. 1107, for you don't know, is the guidance around Europe and Part 382 in the States. I think you are a little, in the States it's a little bit better because you can, no?
I wouldn't say that at all.
I don't mean in practice, you've got some customer recourse when it goes wrong. It's a bit better.
Well, yes, and in fact, my experience, which is very limited, but what I've seen is typically airlines, under time pressure, will grab whoever's available. Hopefully big burly guys that can, what they do of course is they'll transfer you from your wheelchair to a aisle chair outside and go take you down the finger onto the aircraft, and then have to transfer you onto a seat. And both of those operations are very manual. We call them manhandling the person from one space to another. If they're lucky, they will have a sling that they can slip under the person and use handles to move that person. If you're not lucky, and in my minor experience, you're unlucky more than you are lucky, you will have the person grab you under your arms and under your knees, and hopefully those two people that assist you can handle the weight. If you're unlucky or if they're untrained, you might be dropped, and that can lead to a whole host of problems, from being injured to just being bruised, just to being humiliated. And all three of those are an undignified process.
And I can tell you,
it's an undignified process the way today to move a person that needs a wheelchair onto the aircraft.
And for a male, it's not great, but for a female, it's so undignified.
Yeah, and the optimal, the state of the art today is having a sling of some sort that has handles on it to lift you, but that's not a common occurrence, I don't believe.
Any other questions from the audience?
There's a lovely dog down here. He's having the best time ever, although I think we may have sent him to sleep.
Hiya, I'm Eleanor from Inflight magazine. I just wanted to ask, what engagement from airlines and the wider industry would you ideally like to be seeing now to continue to make the aircraft cabin more accessible for everyone?
Iris, do you want to take that?
What would you like to see personally? Take you personally, what would you like to see?
You mean in terms of airlines? I'm sorry, I don't think I understood the question.
Yeah, so from airlines, but then also just wider industry, just everyone. How can everyone contribute to improving?
Yeah, no, I think first of all, I think inclusion is getting more and more awareness in all. It's not only in aviation, and I think a company, and going back to your commercials for whatever, all the big guys, they know that accessibility and inclusion are very good PR for them. And I think so I think for airlines there would be two, other than monetary value and that sort of thing. And again, I think cooperation, we're talking about aviation, so I think cooperation with suppliers, the OEMs, and activists like us, parents, people who deal with having a family member, a disabled family member, that would be key to succeed.
Can I, what was your name? Hello, can I ask how old you are? Inclusion's just, for you, it's a given, yeah? For your generation, it's a given. You don't see exclusion, you don't want to see that. Whereas I'm 60 and I kind of lived through some of that. So I think what I'm saying is, and sustainability goes with this younger generation now, they are choosing their air travel very, very carefully. It's not always about the price. Seb?
Yeah, so you asked Elena about how we can standardize or how we can engage with each other. If you look at the aviation... Wow. Now I'm deaf. So the... what we usually have are standardization groups. You would have an SAE standardization group for fire, you would have it for cargo, you would have it for all matters of things, but you don't have any for inclusion. And I guess having a standard group for inclusion, where you have the members of the industry, where you have the concerned parents, where you have people who actually have the disability, that would be a good step forward.
Inflight magazine. We've heard a lot today about the size of the chair and disabled people in wheelchairs. What about other, I hate the word disability, but other disabilities that make it really difficult to travel, whether that's hearing or visual issues, or whether they're a hidden disability. So something like, I think you touched on it earlier, something like an ADHD and Asperger's, some sort of behavioural condition. There's all these things that happen for the physically less capable people, but what about those that have other needs? So, things with in-flight entertainment systems, how is it down to the cabin crew to help somebody that has visual impairment or a hearing issue to help those passengers? And what can the airlines do to address the other passenger attitudes to the hidden disabilities? Because I flew out on Monday morning. I flew with British Airways, and I was sat next to a lady who really bellowed at a child behind, an able-bodied, perfectly happy child, just sort of kicking the chair, and she really bellowed at him because she wanted to have a little sleep. So what can we do about the passenger? And that's just a child, and there's other things that will go on around people that have additional needs. What can we do to address the attitudes of passengers? That was a long question, sorry.
I believe you had two questions in there. One was on the technical side and the other on the passengers. So for the passengers, I would like Iris later to answer, but I can tell you quick. For instance, for people who are mute or deaf, you could have very simple cards in your airplane which show symbols, right? Like, I want a drink, or what's on the menu. Today everything's written. If you can't speak, you cannot make yourself understood with a flight attendant, and there are very simple and actually very affordable solutions for that. I think we generally concentrate on the wheelchair users because on one hand their pain is quite visible. They have a great lobby with people like Walt or also with Chris, whereas you seldom hear from the deaf, mute or even blind community. So that's why we do less for them, whereas it would be very easy to do lots of good things for them. And exactly.
There's a lot of tricky things in there, and in the UK I know that there's this thought that you shouldn't have to declare your disability, and I find that a tricky one because if I don't know, I can't do anything. So I find that kind of there's two arguments to both sides there. I always love a question from a journalist. It's one question, 5 parts.
We still had the part on what can the cabin crew do. Maybe.
Yeah, what can the
So what I'd like, first of all, I think it's a great question, and it's not only in airlines. We're talking about society. How can we, when we go in a public place and there's a child who is on the spectrum and his parents are so embarrassed because of his behavior, but I think things are changing worldwide, and the understanding that if a kid is a little bit wild, it may not be that he's not well educated or that his parents did a bad job. It's just he has some sort of a problem. But I think as the crews are very aware, but the problems even start earlier because having to work in customer relations, I know that sometimes in the reservation process there is a problem because nobody has, you don't have a box to check whether you're traveling with a disabled or mentally disabled.
We need additional support. Yeah,
I think that would be...
The lanyards are great, but additional support.
And there's also a group which I met in Israel. It's called the Sunflower Group. Which
that's that
right.
In the UK, yeah.
And you basically wear a tag where you announce yourself. Nobody puts a tag on you, but you say, okay, I have maybe a non-visible disability or something like, just give me another 2 minutes. I don't want to be first in line. I don't need any special needs, just so that you know that my son needs another 2 minutes to get himself organized. So that's, again, one project that can help raise the awareness of different types of disabilities.
Yeah, and
Marvelous.
for me, I will come to you just in 1 second, but for me, when somebody is travelling that maybe has a hidden need or any need, you don't want to necessarily announce it, but it starts at the reservation, and there needs to be a proper process put in place so that the check-in staff are aware that that person that's coming up needs more time, or it should automatically be, we have a crew ready, they have a sling, or we have, we're going to board you first because you are wearing your sunflower lanyard, and it should be the complete process. It should be from booking, there should be a possible, but it fails so miserably, and it seems so simple. Sorry.
Thomas.
I can tell you're a reporter. It's wonderful. I don't know if I can answer the question, but I'd like to just comment on a few things that were said. I didn't have the benefit of the first part of the meeting, but I have a question and a comment. My comment first is, we talk a lot about accommodation, we talk a lot about inclusion. Really, exclusion is what we're trying to solve for right now in the industry. So people that are being excluded from being able to fly, inclusion being the opposite end of the spectrum. But what I would propose, what I would say, is that what we want the airline industry to embrace and what the experience for passengers with disabilities to be is essentially the same. It's called the ETS, essentially the same. So your traveling experience, you mentioned about the blind person who sits there for 18 hours on a flight with no access to in-flight entertainment. That's been me. I've been there. My experience is not essentially the same as the person who has access to that. My inability to use the lavatory is not essentially the same experience if I'm sitting there very uncomfortable as the passenger. So that's the bar, not just inclusion, but essentially the same customer experience as we work towards that. My question is, what's the most innovative thing that you, the panelists, have seen in terms of aircraft design that's put a smile on your face?
So it's just over there on the Delta Flight product stand. But let's throw this out to the panel because that's quite unfair. I'm going to start that in because we are getting close. 11:45, is that shut down? Okay, 3 minutes. Go on, Seb. Can you talk for 30 seconds or is that beyond you? You have to go more.
So the coolest thing I had seen was we once had a language, so language activated lavatory which talked to you and automatically detected which language you were talking. That was funny. So whatever you said, it picked it up and it was running on a small processor like that.
And nobody's used that.
When you try to bring that into actually flying, it's a little bit more costly.
Costly.
Yeah.
That's all. It's just cost. Okay. Iris?
Again, I'm going to refer more to the service part rather than the technological part because that's where I'm coming from. And so I'll just sum up with a small story that I have when I was a flight attendant, and there was a group coming from Thailand actually, and there was one big guy. He came up to me in the back alley, and he didn't stop talking, and I realized there was a problem there. And he said to me, you know, my lifelong dream is to be in the cockpit. And he just didn't stop talking. And I was a new flight attendant, and I said, I'm going to make his dream come true. And I picked up courage, and I went to the purser, and I said, can we arrange for this guy to go into the cockpit for landing? And he said, sure, but you're going in with him. Eventually, he got so scared, and his whole group cheered him up and said, you must go in, you must go in. But he got so scared that he sat down and he didn't speak at all. But to me, it made a whole difference. As a flight attendant,
Incredible.
not as a mother, not as anything, I try to do something good for someone.
And that's it.
Well,
Well, I'll leave the last little bit for you, Chris, because I know exactly where you're going to go with this. But I'm going to also start with a story because my experience.
so it's got to be.
I know. I'm sorry. I apologize.
2 minutes.
I might go over a little bit, but my experience is 30 years working in passenger seating on aircraft, and so while it's not a specific idea or a specific item that's out there today, I have a lot of faith in the industry. I've seen the industry go through a lot of experiences and a lot of change from just very simple business class seats where they're mechanically actuated to today's very expensive and very fancy, got doors and suites and cooling and heating and all this. So I have a lot of faith in the industry. And I think once this becomes mandated, and I think it will become mandated, some sort of accessibility and some sort of increased accessibility requirements, I think the industry will respond very quickly, and it'll respond with a lot of creativity, and I'm really just looking forward to that creativity and that response, and we're beginning to see that now. People are starting to think about this, so I would only ask the industry as a whole, keep this on your radar, change is coming, and when it comes, be ready, and we want some really good creative solutions, and we're going to see them. And I have a lot of faith in the industry, and I think that's the way I would respond to that odd question of yours.
Well, I'm going to finish with one thing, with not what you think. My daughter travelled back to Fiji with her carer, and they were split up. She was in one seat, carer in another, and the lady sitting next to my daughter, who wasn't part of her team, got up and said, look, do you want to sit next door to each other? And Lanny, who was travelling with my daughter, said, well, you're sitting with your husband. Nah, he's going to snore all flight. You sit next to Taylor. And so sometimes it's not always cabin crew, it's not always the airline, because actually passengers tend to be really nice human beings, and so we're better than we think. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.